Buongiorno e benvenuti al primo incontro della terza serie di dialoghi copernicani. Oggi l'incontro si svolgerà in inglese e abbiamo come ospiti Neves e Tuppen di Jesse. So, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us. And the idea of this talk was triggered after reading several alarmistic statements of greenhouse emission of the internet and the digital overconsumption. Computing industry carbon emission is now in the spotlight. Due to the device miniaturization and invisibility of the related infrastructure, carbon footprint of the digital service has been constantly underestimated, or at least it seems like this reading the newspaper right now. Data center, clouds, IoT, blockchain, and so on are now under scrutiny. And they will always gather more attention since climate debate is widening beyond the traditional targets. And it's not only a question of coal plants or steel or aviation, it's also industries that are shifting to cloud process based, like we have seen with the last agreements, Stellantis and with Amazon, and they're showing that electric self-driving car now, software is no more on the car based, but it's moving on cloud. So all this put information and communication technology on the spotlight, and we can believe it's a heavy electricity consumer. But how much heavy? And this is still a sticking point. So on the US Energy Information Administration, I found out that in 2020, industrial energy consumption breakdown put manufacturers of 77%, mining 12%, construction 7%, agriculture 5%. But how to figure out ICT share? And considering that greenhouse gases depended from its energy mix, ICT sectors makes a contribution to global warming that can be as high as aviation, as someone is saying, or worse than chemical or cement. So should we feel guilty watching video streaming or making our billions of mail or message or this Zoom meeting? However, estimates of the web greenhouse emission on total emission swings from 1.4 to 5.9%. And this is quite a large fork. To investigate on the subject, we invited Neves, CEO of Global Enabling Sustainability Initiative, and Tuppen, climate change lead at Jesse. So first of all, I would like to ask Neves if he would briefly present the Jesse organization. Please, Luis, the floor is yours. We can't hear you.
Yes, now I'm on, I think. Thank you so much for the invitation, first of all, and it's with great pleasure that we are here today, myself and Tuppen, to address the questions that you have raised and that, as you said, are on the spotlight. I would like to stress that, or I would like to refer that we would not like this to be a kind of competition between sectors. I think what is important is to understand that every single industry has its own footprint, and every single industry should take care of it and should make sure that they have to become more efficient, and we have to be conscious that we are facing a huge challenge. So climate change is really, and emissions are growing steadily, and it's our responsibility, every single business, to make sure that we reduce our own footprinting and also make our efforts to become more efficient and help other sectors to become more efficient. So in Jesse, well, first of all, a few words about Jesse. I will not be showing slides. I have a couple of slides. Maybe I will bring one or two at the relevant moment, but I will not bring any specific slide now about Jesse. We are an industry initiative that brings together digital companies. We were created, in fact, at the United Nations Environmental Program as one of the UN initiatives. And Chris Tuppen was the first chair of Jesse, and I took over from him 4 years later. And now I'm in this new role of CEO. And so we were built in the UN environment as a business organization. Later on, we thought that it was important to come out to better develop our activities. We are now based in Brussels. We have an office in Washington, D.C. We bring together not only companies, but also different stakeholders. And in this regard, we are different from every typical business association. So if you look at traditional business associations, they only have in their membership companies. We have in our membership not only companies, but also non-for-profit organizations, UN organizations, universities, other business associations. So we are extremely open to interact with the overall society, and the work that we do is in dialogue with the society. So we have an history of over 20 years of working in digital and sustainability, and every single product or tool or report that we have been doing, it is done together with the different stakeholders and with the society. For instance, in the supply chain area, where our industry has been facing many problems that still continue, we have an extensive dialogue with NGOs to bring them and to have their critical voice to better address the different issues that we are facing. But coming back to the issue of climate change, this discussion goes back in Jesse to the year of 2007. In 2007, Gartner, the quite well-known consultancy, they came up with a report criticizing our industry, saying that our footprint was the same as of the aviation industry. So 2% of the global emissions. And around that time, Chris and myself, we said, well, you know, we need to check this. We need to understand whether this figure is right or wrong. And then we went to the members and told them, well, are you ready to run an investigation about what's going on and to understand what's going on in our sector? And the members said, well, yeah, let's go for it. And we spoke with McKinsey and the Climate Group. As you know, the Climate Group is an independent organization. They are quite big, bigger than Jesse today. And they helped us together with McKinsey to answer 3 questions that we threw out. One was about understanding the footprint of our industry, our own footprint. The second question was about to understand what is the enabling impact of digital technologies in other industry sectors, like, you know, manufacturing, power, mobility, and so on. And the third question was about understanding the business value. And so we commissioned McKinsey and the Climate Group to run that independent study for us. We only provided the data that was required to McKinsey. We had no interference whatsoever in the report. We simply accepted the outcomes of the report as they came out from McKinsey and the Climate Group. And it was around that time, the first report that we called it SMART 2020. The results were that the 2% of our own footprint was confirmed. So the figure from Gartner was confirmed, being our global footprint of 2% of the global emissions. The enabling impact was 5 times bigger than our own footprint, and the business value was incredible. So we're talking about billions of dollars. I cannot remember the figure anymore, but I can provide it if anyone is interested. And actually, you can find it easily on Google, on the internet. And as we did this study with McKinsey, the clear conclusion was, well, if we have a footprint, but we can enable others to be 5 times more efficient, maybe it makes sense to deploy digital technologies. because in fact, we are giving a huge contribution to reduce global emissions. And so, as we have done this report, we decided in 2012 to repeat the same exercise with another consultancy, the Boston Consulting Group. And in 2015, we did the same thing with the Accenture strategy. And in fact, both reports, what they showed is that our own footprint was quite stable. So the 2% was remaining more or less the same. The reason probably was that the global footprint so the emissions globally, they were increasing much faster than our own emissions. And we were also becoming more efficient because digital companies, they were deploying more efficient network infrastructure as well. So we have a quite good, let's say, renovation and by being more efficient, because as we reduce our emissions, we are reducing the energy bill of our own companies. And so the Boston Consulting Group report showed that our footprint was more or less the same, but the enabling impact was 7 times bigger. And then when we did the report with Accenture in 2015, the enabling impact was 10 times bigger, while our own footprint was still more or less the 2% of the global emissions. And so that brought us to the conclusion that while we were seeing more deployment of digital technologies and data was increasing in our networks, and we were seeing more digital solutions being deployed, more people connected to the internet, all those trends were really going up. In spite of that, our own footprinting was still more or less the same. Of course, we were being, finger pointed that we were doing these reports, to protect our own reputation. That is still the same case today. We see critical voices around, our reports. But what I'd like to stress is that our reports, whenever were always carried independently with supervision of external stakeholders. And we, as Jesse, we only provided the required data to the consultants to run the report for us. And the consultants themselves, they had to of course, to find data by their own. We had the intervention of the International Energy Agency in our reports, and many different stakeholders. So I would like to stress that, and this was one of the questions that you sent to us, we paid for the reports, but we paid because, well, if you have a consultant, you need to pay the consultant to do the work. That was the reason why it was paid by ourselves. Otherwise, the reports will not be available, and we could not have any data available. I think all the other reports as well, they are paid by those that commission them as well. So that's not a reason to say that the reports are not credible. So in 2019, we decided to go back to Deloitte, again, another consultant, and ask Deloitte to run quite big report around the digital technologies and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, looking again to our own footprint and looking again to the enabling impact. And this report that we called it Digital with Purpose goes exactly in the same direction of the previous reports. So we have now enough evidence, and we, as Jesse, we will not, I must say, we will not like to spend our time discussing about if it's 2 or 3 or 4. The important thing is, even if it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, the enabling impact of digital technologies is having a positive impact on climate. So the more technology we are deploying, the more are we enabling other industry sectors to become more efficient. And we see that in every single industry. So the other day I was trying to measure the level of a table in my place, and I was looking for that device that allows you to see whether a physical device, whether the table is even or not. And then my niece told me, well, you have a mobile, with a mobile you can measure that. So you have many different things on digital solutions that simply dematerialize many things that we used to have in our hands. And this is the trend that the world is going. So 60% of the world now is depending on digital. It will be increasing this number. So the global economy will be more and more dependent on digital, artificial intelligence, blockchain, virtual reality, whatever you call it. In the digital repurpose report, we analyzed 7 disruptive technologies in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals, and the conclusion was that analyzing the 169 KPIs of the SDGs, digital technologies will impact 22% of them in a positive manner, so direct impact, and they will reduce the negative trend of 23% of them as well. So we have this evidence in our hands. For us as GSE and for the industry, is not about making the business case. We have the business case. Our industry is convinced that the more we invest in innovative solutions, we are giving a positive contribution to the world, and we are growing the economy, we are creating new job opportunities, and so on. For us now, what is important is to focus on reducing what we call our externalities. And the externalities of our sector, they can be summarized in 5 areas. One, of course, is energy consumption and CO2 emissions. So we want to become more efficient. We want to make sure that the companies and the sector and the industry does everything at its hands to become greener. That means also investing in deploying green energies to support and to power our infrastructure, and align with the SBTI, the Science Based Targets Initiative, and we are leading that process. So if you look at the number of companies that are in the SBTI initiative, the biggest number of them are digital companies. So you see how we are taking this seriously. Secondly, we need to address the issue of circular economy. It's very much related with the use of devices, how they are used, how they are, the materials are brought back into the market. Then we have the issue around supply chains, having supply chains more efficient, also addressing sustainability impacts in the supply chains like child labor. We need to eradicate child labor from supply chains. Then we have the issue around digital inclusion. We see more and more people out of the network, so we need to provide more connectivity to give access to more people, because we also have evidence the more access we give, the more we are impacting the global economy. And then finally, the issue related with what we call in GSE digital trust and responsibility, which is very much about the impacts of digital in privacy and security, ethical standards, human rights, and so on. So instead of focusing, in spending time in arguing about our own footprint, we want to focus on the solution side. It's about how we get our members in the industry moving in a positive agenda, what we call now the digital repurpose movement. And this is our focus, and this is where we would like to go. Acknowledging that we have a problem, but also making sure and also communicating clearly that we understand the problem better than anyone. We know what the problem is all about. And by knowing how the problem is about, we want to focus on the solution side and being serious and credible moving forward.
Thank you, Luis. Well, you mentioned it's interesting to see the decoupling from one side, the greenhouse gases emission are always around 2% the contribution, but on the other side we see that the enabling impact is growing. So now we are around 10 times, and I think that if we were then your next survey, maybe in 2 years' time, so maybe it's even more than 10 times. It's growing even faster. But you just mentioned in the externalities you are focusing on. the energy consumption. In fact, server farms are they are consuming a lot of energy. And whereas GAFAM are boasting their carbon offsetting measures or the acquisition of new solar farms, accountability and transparency on the energy figure maybe should improve. Do you think that something should be done?
Well, we have been quite transparent in communicating what we are doing. So if you look at the reports of major corporations, I'm thinking about companies like Deutsche Telekom, which I worked for many years, but BT that Chris was leading, or Telefonica, or you think about big European companies, as well as American companies like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. We have been reporting in a very transparent manner our own emissions. So scope 1, scope 2, which is easier. Scope 3 it's a very difficult area where we are facing some challenges, but we also understand that, and Chris, correct me because Chris is our climate expert in Jesse, 2/3 of our emissions are coming from scope 3 from our supply chain activities. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, it's usually about 2/3 or even 80%.
Yeah, and so this is a very difficult area because it requires us to work together with our main suppliers, and it's not easy always to get the right figures and right numbers, and also to engage our supplier base to provide the numbers. But we do our best to be transparent, to clearly communicate the numbers in the right manner. One thing that I would like to stress is also something that I didn't mention before. In our studies, we always took into account the rebound effect. And the rebound effect has been very much into the conversation. The first smart studies, the rebound effect figure that we took into account was around 10%. In the digital repurpose report, the rebound effect number was 50%. So that we could communicate better. And we took 50% because there were different figures out there in the market. And we said, okay, let's take the biggest one just to understand really if we are still, net positive, as we used to say. And we are. So even with the rebound of 50% in our 2019 study, we could see the enabling impact of digital technologies is really, really extremely positive. So there is clearly a reason, a business case to deploy digital technologies for good, to impact positively climate. Of course, we will spend our lives discussing the numbers right and wrong, but what we see, our evidence, is that the more we deploy digital technologies, the better are we giving a contribution to climate and to reduce global emissions. But Chris, I don't know if you'd like to add something.
Maybe we come back to the rebound effect a little later, but just to add something on the cloud service providers, because Luis mentioned the sort of scope 1, 2, 3, the corporate level reporting, which often is there. But what people are increasingly interested in as customers of these service providers is to know what their share of that company's footprint is, because that is what they need to put in their scope 3 supply chain report. I've worked with companies in all sorts of different sectors, most recently in the publishing sector, where more publishing is going digital rather than paper. That's all hosted on cloud service providers. And what they want to know is, okay, so what's my footprint on your platform? And I think this is the area where the transparency really falls over at the moment. It's trying to get that information out of some of the big cloud service providers is becoming difficult. And within Jesse, we are sort of currently having discussions amongst our members about the kind of questions that they're receiving from their customers. So I think the way to make this more transparent is to put more customer pressure on the cloud service provider. So anyone that is buying from one of the big service providers, ask them the question, what's the carbon footprint of my use of your platform? And also get it in energy terms as well as carbon terms, because often, as you say, they say, oh, we've offset it, so you don't need to worry, it's zero. But of course, we know offsetting is not always as good as it made out to be.
Sure, but this shouldn't be brought in the balance sheet. For instance, I will pick up right now a question from our audience, and Massimo Ziglio is asking, in 2021 11 HBR column, I really don't know what this accountant's meaning for. Anyways, there are some examples of ESG accounting that has been presenting. Are there any similar evidence for the digital industry? I guess he wants to know if there are some specific points that the digital industry is using in accounting for the environmental balance sheet. Is it correct, Massimo? Well, I don't know if Chris or Luis wants to answer this.
I'm just having a quick look at this page on the internet. Not familiar with this, but it is talking about scopes 1, 2, and 3. This is the standard greenhouse gas reporting protocol that all companies will follow, and then it talks about tracking emissions across the supply chain. So yeah, so with scope 3, so scope 1 and 2 about the operations of the company itself and its use of electricity in its own operations. That's always much more easy to measure. Scope 3 would include all the supply chain activities and also the use of products by customers. So if you are supplying computer hardware, then the consumption of your hardware by your customers would be part of your scope 3. This is never as easy to measure as scopes 1 and 2, but people are increasingly being more transparent about their scope 3 emissions. And in terms of carbon reduction targets, the Science-Based Targets Initiative effectively set the corporate standard for carbon reductions for companies who want to set a target and a net zero target as well. And they are increasingly including quantitative scope 3 emission reductions in their target requirements. So that there's more and more pressure coming on companies to be transparent and to include them in targets.
But maybe I you know, are you seeing this slide here I'm sharing?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so this is coming from our digital repurpose report, which is the latest information that we got. And as you can see here, we are measuring, you know, the different areas, the different areas. So from, you know, data centers, users, transmission, and manufacturing. And this is, let's say, a representation from the evolution of the emissions of our industry from 2015 to 2030. And as you can see, it's moving from 800 megatons of CO2 to around 900 in the next, within 15 years time. But if you look at the right side, you see the opportunities for abatement, which are much higher than our own footprint again, also by the different sections. And so this to show that we are really looking into in our industry. So when we are doing these reports, we are considering scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So we are taking into account everything and measuring everything. And we, as Chris said, we follow traditional standards, the greenhouse gas protocol. We align with the SBTi. Of course, this is a long journey. It is not something easy to do. This is also a new field. What we have been working in JES in the last 20 years is try to really align on the methodologies and providing information, bringing different companies together with different interests. We have this now carbon accounting working group on data centers. This is a new field that Chris is leading, and we have been working very hard to provide trustable information to different stakeholders. And by the way, in JESI, we will be leading our project in the European Commission, the European Union, called the European Green Digital Coalition, and together with the Carbon Trust, with the University of Brighton, with Deloitte, with the different business associations, GSMA, Digital Europe, Digital SME Alliance, JESI, ETNO. All together, we are now developing a methodology that hopefully will be a standard at the European level around how do we measure the enabling impact of digital technologies in different industry sectors. So that means we will be working with the power sector, with mobility, with manufacturing, with all those sectors to try to understand what is the right standard to measure the enabling side. By the way, it's not about the footprint, it's not about our own, but that was the decision of the Commission, because there is lots of different methodologies. In JESI, we have a long tradition on that comes back to, as I said, to 2007. But now the European Commission wants to have its own standard that will then flow into the European taxonomy as well. And we will be leading that work, which also shows the credibility of our organization. So we went on a call for tender with many others, and we won that project. So by the end of this year, probably we'll have something more tangible that we can show, and that can be used as a standard in the future as well.
Thank you, Luis. You mentioned stakeholders. By the way, media and Italian media lately referred to a study of the Royal Society, which estimates that ICT emission were falling between 1.4 to 5.9% of total gas greenhouse emission. And then there was another study that was referred by the Italian media, and it's a Lancaster University study in September 2021 that indicates somewhere between 2.1 and 3.9% of the emission, of the total emission. So from 1.4, which is almost less than the one you found out from your records, to nearly 6%, is quite a gap. How can you explain these? These are independent studies, and why is media always picking other studies and never your study? Because as I remember, recall at the beginning, this talk was really triggered after I read several statements on the newspaper, which were really alarmistic. So I wanted to have another point of view, and that's why we have here you as a guest. So how is it possible from 1.4 to 6%?
Well, I do. I don't know if Chris has an explanation. Chris, would you like to jump in? But I will. I have my own view about that, but I will let Chris now.
Okay.
Because he before this call, he read the Lancaster study. He had the time for it.
So first, let's say the Lancaster study is a very good overview of the situation. So it's not only their study, but they have reviewed all the other studies that have been presented. So. And they do a very good job,
including the JESI studies.
Yeah. But let me try and explain why there's such a big range. First of all, not everyone defines the ICT sector in the same way. So everyone includes computers, networks, data centers. They're generally always in the studies. Some studies include TV and media. Some studies might include cryptocurrencies. And you mentioned earlier about cars. You know, I'm not sure whether my car's a computer with wheels now, or a car with a computer in it. I mean, it seems to be almost the former. So I think, firstly, not everyone has used the same definition of the ICT sector. The second thing is what is actually measured. The electricity consumption of the devices themselves, that's clear, that's always in there. The manufacture of the devices, so manufacture of the computers or the mobile phones or the routers or whatever. Then you might go down to the next level, which would be the manufacture of the components, the semiconductors, the capacitors, the resistors, and so on, that get built into these things. And then you might go back to the mining of the materials themselves. So if you've got a computer with an aluminium case around it, there was the mining of the bauxite, the refining of the aluminium, and so on and so forth. So that goes down another layer of detail. And then you might get into, as I think the Lancaster report does. So when they did their calculations, they included everything that an ICT company was buying. So where it was the bricks in their offices, or the steel that's in the vans that drive around the streets, through to, I guess, the food that they eat in their canteens. So there's a carbon footprint associated with all of that, which to my mind sits in other sectors, not in the ICT sector. So somewhere you've got to join on things like supply chain as to where the sector starts and stops. And different people have drawn different lines in the sand, which means they get different answers. There's then the question of the carbon intensity of the electricity that you use in the calculations you make. So, you know, you work out how much electricity is being consumed. We know that different countries have got very different carbon intensities. So do they just take some kind of global average, or do they actually identify where people are using devices and the manufacturing is taking place? And I think some do a very, very broad generalization, and others look at it more specifically. And then finally, there's the way in which companies and the people who made these calculations have considered procurement of renewable electricity. So if people have purchased renewable energy certificates to claim zero carbon electricity, does that get counted as zero, or does that get counted as what's called location-based reporting and so on? So you can see that the whole sort of raft of parameters that can give you a very big wide range of end results, and often studies aren't that clear exactly which they've chosen and which not, and some studies have also used very proprietary information, so you can't actually look under the bonnet of their calculations to understand how they've done it.
Okay, very clear. Well, for several decades, we always have seen Silicon Valley as the ally of the climate change policy. I remember reading things like ICT would save us from climate change. It was over 9 years ago, and they would predict a decrease in greenhouse gases of 16% in 2020. And that hasn't happened, of course. But why has the sentiment so changed? What has trigger a different opinion on ICT climate change responsibility, in your opinion? And second question, or maybe you want to answer first, this, and then I will ask you about the synergy, possible synergy.
Well, I think we are a very sexy industry, everybody, because, well, on one side, it's clear that the world, as we move forward, will be more and more depending on technology. So Chris mentioned this car. Is this car a computer, or is this car, a traditional car? So we both drive a Tesla now. So when I look to my Tesla, I can control everything from my app. I enter the car, everything, it's digital. The car calculates the better, route where I'm going. It detects everything. It can go alone, So you have really a fantastic computing capacity in something with four wheels. So it's no longer the traditional combustion engine thing. And so the same thing applies to many other industries. So I give an example which is very close to my heart. I decided to change everything in a place that I own, where I had, a traditional, generator. I have gas. I have everything. Now I have everything run by solar panels. It's a huge difference. But that only works because you have digital capabilities. Otherwise, that would not work. And so you are seeing that the world is moving and relying more and more on digital capabilities. And that will continue. So if that's the case, of course, we become very sexy, because everything that is close to our environment is depending on digital components or digital technologies. It goes from gaming, social media, banking. Everything is now becoming more and more digital. And of course, we became very sexy, and we are on the spotlight, which is not a bad thing. I think it's important to be on the spotlight, and it's important to have critical voices challenging what this industry is doing. But I think the conversation needs to be serious. It cannot be a kind of competition between A and B, or B and C. It's about, each industry looking at itself and saying, well, recognizing what's going wrong and changing the wrong to the better when possible, and also harnessing the potential of its own capabilities to drive a better world for everybody. And so our conclusion in our GSE reports, and as I said, this is not a new field to us. We have been working on this for over 14 years now. We have been looking into these problems, back to, as I said, to 2007. What we are seeing is that the more technology we deploy, and once you deploy technology, you see an improvement, you see a benefit. We have a database in GSE that we created 2 years ago that we called it the Digital Access Index, where we have, it's a huge database. We have 17 indicators where we have data from, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, IoT. We even consider in the database the costs of communications, affordability, and so on and so on. So what we saw, and the result, if you look into that database, all that amount of data that is credible data, you see the countries that deployed more technology are the countries where people is living much better. And this is, undeniable. It's based on evidence, on data. It's not about discussing which one is better or not. It's the data is there. It's simply there. And so when you look at that, you see the ranking, and you see that's an example for others to deploy technology to be better as well. Mm-hmm. So we would love everybody to have access to technology. We would love everybody to have connectivity, to have internet, because that would allow those countries, those people to have a better living standard, to have a better education, to have access to better health, and so on and so on. And so, to those voices that criticize our industry, my reply is always the same. I would love to have more technology deployed, because the more we deploy, we will see a huge improvement for everybody, for every single sector would benefit from that, and we have evidence about that. The problem, though, that we have is that we see that there is a concentration of power in a group of companies, of corporations that are leading this process. And so we need to democratize more technology. We need to invest more and give access as much as possible to more people to technology, and make sure that those potentials are available to everybody. So I would not worried about that conversation. I would rather think the more we give connectivity to people, the better for everybody. And the results will come after, because our studies, the 2015 report calculated 20% of emission reduction globally derived from ICT. So, and these numbers, every time that we do a report, they increase, as I mentioned before.
Can I just add something, if I may, which is that within the report, the figures that Luis has just mentioned are based on an assumption that the society, that lawmakers, regulators, economic instruments will come into play to move us in a more sustainable place. And I think if we think digital technology is a silver bullet that on its own is going to move and decarbonize the whole of society, then that's a misplaced assumption. However, if we see, for example, a price on carbon being brought in, which becomes more possible after the Glasgow summit, then I think you'll see much more build up of, or realization of, the savings that can be made from digital technology. It's this, to an extent, it's this rebound effect. We know if we make transport flow more easily and it creates space on the roads, then cars all of a sudden appear to fill the gap on the road. It's just human nature, and so somehow we've got to bring in measures that control the consumption at the same time as providing the solutions to give you the alternatives. That's where digital comes in.
Thank you, Chris. Very clear. So if I understand, the more the deployment of digital tech, the more people are better off. And this is very clear, and you have data on this. But now let's consider digital overconsumption, because all this, of course, the more the deployment of digital tech means that there is a multiplication of data flows and also energy consumption and so on. And I've read that the think tank, the Shift project, presented a report, Lean ICT, and to assess the environmental impact of digital technology. And it brought up the idea of digital sobriety, which is a bit different from the idea of more deployment of digital tech. And a sober digital transition consists, according to them, of course, in buying the least powerful equipment possible, changing them the least often possible, reducing unnecessary energy-intensive use. But is this a viable solution, according to you? Forcing companies to adopt a more sober digital transition? Forcing government also to adopt public policy in this direction?
I always tell a story that it's a real story that happened with me. A couple of years back, I was invited by the UN for a big conference. There were many countries around the table, and the discussion was exactly about this problem. The meeting was in Africa, where many impacts are taking place, because we know that there is disposal of mobile phones and many other electronic devices in landfills, and creating a huge negative impacts on climate and also social problems as well. So, and of course, the UN was concerned about this discussion about, digital overconsumption, as you call it, wrong disposal of digital devices, not appropriate, recycling, and so on. And and I was around the table, and I was the only speaker, by the way, and so I had, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 governments, firing at me. And at a certain point, I started to look at the tables, and almost everybody had 2 or 3 mobile phones on the table. So this is not only an issue for the companies. Of course, the companies, because companies, they develop their business models to make profit. And but we as consumers, we need to be conscious of our own behavior and our own responsibility. So if I can live with one mobile, and if I can keep my mobile for years, why do I need to change it every 6 months? And so I know that the companies, they create mechanisms and marketing strategies to sell more and more and more. But we as people, we need to be conscious that we are living in difficult times, and we ourselves, we need also to put in place our own, we have to have a different behavior, said differently. Of course, that does not take off our own responsibility as companies. We as companies, corporations, we need to walk the talk. And we need really to make sure that we put in place the right mechanisms to avoid a climate catastrophe that nobody wants. And in that regard, what we have in the JESI member companies and our members, we are conscious of this, and we have been developing, recommendations, strategies, and we put in place now something that we hope that it will be transformative. And this is something that Chris is leading together with me, something that we call the Digital with Purpose movement. And the Digital with Purpose movement is about an action agenda, is about walking the talk, is about companies really looking to their problems, and also harnessing the potential of the solution. So the movement is about 3 things. One is companies aligning their purpose with the Sustainable Development Goals. So considering that they need to change their business models, taking into account that we are facing a huge challenge and that we need to achieve those objectives by 2030 that are laid out in the Sustainable Development Goals. And what we are calling our companies to do is really to adapt their governance structure in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. This will not be easy because companies are driven by shareholder value, and that will require a major shift internally in companies, but this is about adapting procurement, marketing, whatever you can think about in the company governance structure aligned with sustainability and the sustainable models. The second layer of the movement is about what we call responsible business. It's about companies to become more efficient in their operations, reducing their footprint, buying renewable energies, having in place a circular economy strategy, bridging the digital divide, being more efficient in their supply chains activities, reducing their Scope 3 emissions, and so on. And then the third layer of the movement is about innovations for good, innovations that impact positively other sectors. So we are looking at innovations which have an impact in biodiversity, natural capital, human rights, climate change, education, and the health and well-being. And so this is a set of indicators. So the movement is a tool, in fact. So we designed this tool with an ambition towards 2030. And we told the JESI member companies, where do you need to be in 2030? So what does that mean to be a leader in 2030 on climate? Being a leader by 2030 on climate is being net zero. But it's being really net zero. It's not about, offsetting or whatsoever. It's about really walking the talk. And so we designed this process, and we designed the certification model for the companies with different layers, starting from the committed area to the diamond level. And so we have 4 layers, and we will be monitoring the companies around this. And the Digital with Purpose movement was launched last year. during the Portuguese presidency. We have now more than 40 companies that joined from the very beginning, and the movement is increasing. We are still designing the process, but what we need is an action agenda. We do not need promises, because if you go to a climate summit, what you see, hundreds, thousands of companies promising everything to policymakers, saying, well, I will reduce my emissions by 50% by so and so. No one is monitoring that. We need something different. We need a tool that monitors that, and GST put in place now. The tool is the digital repurpose movement. We have, I don't know, 100 and something indicators in all these different areas, and we will be calling the companies to join the movement, to show what they are doing, and this movement will be verified. There will be verification every year. There will be a ranking of the best companies, and this is a race to the sky. We want to move. We want this to be competitive, to be different, to be credible, and I do not see any other way, because we cannot live on promises. We really need to walk the talk.
Very, very interesting. So I understand well. Next year, it's a first presentation of the first result of this process.
At the end of this year, we will have the first 2022. We'll have the first results of those companies that join. Hopefully, many. Let's see. Because this will be very hard.
No,
this will be the difference between making promises to real action and to show what companies are doing, because we have a very stringent and a very credible framework in place. If you think about climate, for instance, and Chris can explain it better, it's really about getting the companies by 2030 around net zero. It's not about 2050. 2050 from our perspective is too late.
Okay. Hopefully there won't be any dropout from this process. Sorry.
Can I say something about the sobriety issue again? We're often compared with the airlines in terms of our footprint. How many people in the world frequently fly versus how many people in the world have access and use digital technologies and have mobile phones? Over the last few decades, the number of people across the world that are now using our technologies has just grown and grown and grown. And for those of us that have had it for a long time, the amount of use we give has grown and grown. So we now are quite used to doing what we're doing today from our homes, which a few years ago was completely impossible. And not only that, but the amount of materials that are used. Lewis and I can probably remember, I can remember when it wasn't an internet, when mobile phones were the size of a suitcase and weighed a ton, and today they are incredibly material and energy efficient. And so you take all of that and you think, well, what has the industry delivered? It has delivered a huge amount, and if you compare this with other industries in more traditional sectors, they probably haven't done anywhere near that amount of efficiency gain and power delivery, if you like, that we have. There is always a challenge as to whether or not it can continue. I used to work many years ago in semiconductor research, where people used to say in the 80s, Moore's law is going to run out. We'll no longer be able to keep shrinking the size of devices. But it's never happened. So the challenge for the industry is to continue those trends on efficiency, material and energy, and into the future. And so that's the big innovation challenge. And maybe things like quantum computing will come into play there.
Yeah, thank you. We are right now nearly at the end. And I have still a question, which is a very big question. I'm afraid it's the last one because we don't have much time on this. Is it possible to envisage a greener and eco-friendly blockchain technology? Because we know perfectly well that blockchain is, let's consider cryptocurrency mining and so on. It's really very using a lot of energy. And several countries has banned it. But how can we imagine these are trends that are growing, and how can we manage they won't put a higher hazard on climate change, and how to cope with them?
Lewis, she's on mute.
Yeah, I'm already. So I must confess that I'm not an expert on blockchain. I've been reading different reports about this issue, and I do believe that mainly Bitcoin mining is really a problem, and it's clear that mining coins and digital coins is really leading to greater energy consumption. And well, that's a business as any other in the market, any other business. So I don't think that well, I have an answer to that. What we also see is that there are other digital currencies, and I give you an example. The Ripple currency, for instance, which is very used, as probably even at a greater degree than Bitcoin, because Ripple is a currency that is now used with many central banks as well for digital transactions, is extremely energy efficient. So there is not a one size fits all in this conversation. I think there are different business models around the crypto coins, and it's clear. It seems clear now that Bitcoin mining represents a challenge, but that does not mean necessarily that all cryptocurrencies are going in the same directions, and all these crypto assets are all in the same level of energy consumption. There are some of them which are pretty energy efficient and they are creating even positive impacts. Others are going in the wrong direction. I think that we need a deep dive on that. I do not know. In Jesse, this has not been a matter of great discussion, to be honest, because this is a new green field. I think that we might take the time to explore that later, maybe in the year. We have now this year we have a quite intensive program with Digital with Purpose and with the European Green Digital Coalition, which is our priority. But we would be glad to join any consortia that would be interested in explore that research, because it's important that we have it clear for everybody and that we understand what is the real impact of that.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to add something? No.
Nope.
So thank you so much, Luis, Neves, and Dr. Chris Tuppen from Jesse for this very interesting talk. I just want to remember to everybody that we have our next meeting on Tuesday, January the 25th for Hacking Budget Il Bilancio dello Stato in Chiaro. And we will present our tool gov.it to read more clear what is on the Italian public budget. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the thoughtful questions as well.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.